People visiting the Dearborn Historical Museum often ask how Dearborn got its name. And so for this video, I wanted to explain who is Dearborn's namesake. So Dearborn was actually named after General Henry Dearborn, a native of Northampton, New Hampshire, who was born in 1751. So much of General Dearborn's career is really based in the American Revolution. When he was a young man, upon hearing news of the battles of Lexington and Concord, he actually brought a large party of New Hampshire soldiers down to the Boston area where they took part in the Battle of Bunker Hill and fought fairly bravely. Later on, as the war develops, he's involved in, commanding New Hampshire soldiers up toward the battles up in Quebec. He's involved in commanding New Hampshire soldiers later on throughout the war. Really, at his highest rank, though, he's basically a lieutenant colonel, at times serving as a temporary commander of a New Hampshire regiment. At times, Washington commended him in the war, and Washington, toward the Battle of Yorktown, actually promoted him to sort of a deputy quartermaster rank. So after the American Revolution, Dearborn actually moves up to Maine, which at the time was actually still part of Massachusetts politically. Up there, he's very prominent in economics. He's serving as a major general in the militia in Maine. He actually gets elected to Congress for 2 terms. And while he's there, he's serving as part of the burgeoning Democratic Republican Party, which is kind of the new party that's effectively run by Thomas Jefferson. And so when Thomas Jefferson is elected in the 1800 election, Dearborn is actually picked to serve as Secretary of War. Serving as Secretary of War for Jefferson was really one of the most significant moments of Henry Dearborn's career. During that time, from about 1801 to 1809, he's basically carrying out all the military priorities of the Jefferson administration. Early on, he's doing matters like establishing West Point. At one point, apparently right before he started work, the War Department actually burned down and he had to basically reestablish the offices of the War Department. Notable early on too, Jefferson really wanted the military shrunk in size. So one of the things he did was basically shrink the military from about 4,000 soldiers to like 2,500. He's everything that Jefferson is calling for in his political campaigning in regards to the military, to Native American policy. Dearborn is actually the one who's carrying it out. Jefferson wanted to do more with supposedly Christianizing the Indians and civilizing them, setting up trading posts with them and the like. Dearborn's the one who's actually, organizing the efforts, the one who's actually issuing the checks to go to these efforts. He's the one that's there really just setting up all these affairs. But as time goes on during the Jefferson administration, things get more unstable. There's the possibility with Napoleon taking over Louisiana that they're worried about having a war over in Louisiana. So Dearborn's involved with kind of sending troops over there. The Ehrenberg conspiracy, where there was the possibility of Louisiana and the Mississippi River territory being taken from the U.S. is going on, and Dearborn's the one who's really having to deal with some of the aftermath of that. There's a lot of problematic events. Britain, fires on the USS Chesapeake, and so everybody starts thinking we're going to be at war with Britain soon, and so suddenly the Jefferson administration changes course and starts rearming the U.S. military quite a bit, and Dearborn's involved in all these matters. Notable closer to home, Dearborn is the one who's in charge of trying to have the Native Americans give up land in the Detroit area. He actually orders William Hull, who was commander at Detroit, to negotiate with the Native Americans, and what resulted was the 1807 Treaty of Detroit, which pretty much kicked most Native Americans out of the immediate Detroit area. In general, though, this time as Secretary of War, it's he shrunk the military quite a bit, and while he, remedied matters quite a bit, the actual total expenditures, even at the end of the Jefferson administration, were tiny. And in many ways, this left the country fairly badly prepared defense-wise. A couple other things I wanted to mention about his time as Secretary of War. In 1803, Dearborn actually ordered the commander at Detroit, Colonel John Hamtramck, to send men across what is now Michigan and around Lake Michigan to the site of today's Chicago to establish a new fort. That place became Fort Dearborn as Dearborn was Secretary of War. And that fort that's built there, that's why today in Chicago there's Dearborn Street, Dearborn Station, all these place names that are named Dearborn. Also, a few years later in 1807, while Dearborn was Secretary of War, the military reservation that became the site of Dearborn today was established. A few years later, the War of 1812 began, and Henry Dearborn was appointed by President Madison to command the entire U.S. Army. Remember, at this point, Henry Dearborn while he's been Secretary of War, in battle, he's only commanded really a New Hampshire regiment. He's been a quartermaster. He's been a militia general. He's never really commanded a large body of men. So what you have in the War of 1812 as commander, Henry Dearborn is getting old, has all sorts of problems. He has all sorts of trouble trying to organize a proper military effort, trying to negotiate with governors of different states to get proper militia and to back up U.S. Army forces. And so the early part of the War of 1812 is an unmitigated disaster. You have it at Detroit, General William Hull, who is a former territorial governor. He sends a force into Canada, gets bluffed by the British, and ends up surrendering Detroit fairly early on. He actually blames General Dearborn for, not organizing and launching a proper attack toward Quebec that was supposed to happen. He blames him because it was supposed, that was supposed to draw away British forces. Definitely Hull's mostly to blame, but he's probably right about that. Into the next year, there's more failed attacks. There's a number of disastrous battles toward Quebec. There's disastrous battles in the Niagara region. And Henry Dearborn is really removed from command in disgrace. He's given sort of a administrative job in the Northeast toward the end of the war. But while this is going on, I want to go shift the story a bit to the city of Dearborn's founder, Joshua Howard, who was born in 1793 and really joined the military around the War of 1812. He's serving in the war. He's an ordnance officer, which is basically he's dealing with supplies and logistics for the army. He's serving with a regiment and is actually wounded in 1814 in the Niagara region. And he thinks his wound is going to be mortal. And he resigns from the army, but it's noted in at least one Detroit Free Press article that Henry Dearborn, using his connections, was able to give Mr. Howard a job, once he recovered back in 1815, he was able to give him a nice little ordnance job. And that's probably is a big reason why Joshua Howard was really a big fan of Henry Dearborn. After the War of 1812, Henry Dearborn's only significant job was ambassador to Portugal. He sadly passed away in 1829. But only about 4 years after that, Joshua Howard comes back to the Detroit area, and as a posthumous tribute to the general who probably saved his career, he wants to name the Dearborn area after the general. He noted in a letter sent to one of his colleagues that it's worthy naming the area after this guy who's this veteran of the American Revolution, whose only faults, if they can be called so faults, consisted in excess of stern republicanism and inflexible integrity. He's basically talking about how, General Dearborn was this Democratic Republican under the Jefferson regime, and really Joshua Howard, who founded Dearborn, was in reality a Whig. So he's probably not a huge fan of those politics. But he says, he's this man who has honesty of purpose, and he's the one who was Secretary of War when the military reservation at Dearborn was made. He was the Major General of the Army, Senior Major General of the Army when the Ordnance Department that Joshua Howard served many years in was established. So he's giving a number of interesting reasons for honoring the area after him. What you can conclude from all of this is that time and circumstance really affected the name applied to this city. If Dearborn were founded, say, 20 years later in the 1850s by a soldier, there could have been some veteran of the Mexican War who was the namesake of this town. If this town were named by a farmer, perhaps some neighboring family or some family in the area would have been the name of this town. But because this town was really established to serve a military arsenal base, the name of a general was the namesake of Dearborn.